Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a mission that was, let's be honest, doomed from the start. We're going to look at how a whole series of really clear warnings just got pushed aside and how a few bad decisions led to a disaster that was not only predictable, but totally preventable. All right, let's jump right in, but we're actually going to start at the very end. Because to really get a feel for the chain of events here, you have to first see where it all ended up, with a complete and catastrophic failure. Before we can even talk about how to avoid a mess like this in our own lives, we have to sit with the reality of what happened. This isn't just some abstract case study. We're talking about a story with a real, profound loss. And just like that, it was all over in a flash. But the failure, that was set in motion way, way before. And that brings us to the big question we're tackling today. It's not just what happened, right? It's how a known risk, a risk that was spelled out for everyone, was somehow allowed to become a certainty. Okay, so let's hit rewind. We're going to go back to the days and hours before the launch, because that's where this story really begins. The disaster itself was just the final, ugly symptom of a much, much deeper problem. And look, these warnings weren't just some one-off email. No way. This was a clear pattern, and it was escalating. The concerns came from the very people who knew the tech inside and out. It started with some initial worries, hey, are we sure about this? That grew into a formal presentation with data, with charts, showing exactly where things could go wrong. It all ended with a final desperate plea to just stop. And every single time, the answer that came back was, nope, we're going ahead. I mean, just listen to the words here. This isn't some vague technical jargon. This is a direct, crystal clear prediction of what was about to happen. The engineer isn't saying failure is possible. They're saying, hey, we're actively creating the conditions for it. This right here is the definition of a smoking gun. So this brings us to that critical moment, the turning point. The warning's on the table, the data's all there, and still a choice was made that basically sealed the mission's fate. So you have to ask, why? What could possibly be more important than a warning like that? And this slide, man, this just nails the core of the problem. On one side, you have the engineers. They're living in a world of physics, of hard data, of stress tolerances. Their reality is just numbers. But on the other side, you've got management, and they're living in a totally different reality, one driven by deadlines, by budgets, and a ton of pressure from the outside. It's like they were speaking two completely different languages, with two totally different rule books. They were bound to crash. So why? Why were these super clear warnings just brushed off? Well, the answer is often this incredibly powerful psychological force called groupthink. It's what happens when the pressure for everyone in a group to just agree becomes so intense that it crushes any kind of critical thinking. All of a sudden, the person with the dissenting voice, even if they have all the data in the world, they're not seen as helpful. They're seen as a problem, an obstacle. The desire to just move forward as a team becomes way more important than the need to move forward safely. And that's how the story of this one single doomed mission suddenly becomes something much, much bigger. It's not just a story about engineering anymore, is it? It becomes this universal lesson, a cautionary tale about leadership, about company culture, and about the terrible price you pay for not listening.
What's so crucial to understand is that failures like this don't just happen out of the blue. They actually follow a predictable script. And if it's predictable, that means it's preventable. It always starts with good data from the experts. Then, that data gets ignored or twisted because of all these outside pressures. The people who dare to speak up and challenge the plan, they get pushed to the side. And finally, a decision gets locked in. The point of no return is crossed.
So, what's the lesson here? What do we actually take away from this? It's not just a list of nice ideas. It's about building a system, a culture, that can literally break this chain of failure. It means creating a place where hard data is always more important than a deadline. A place where the person who brings you an uncomfortable truth is seen as the most valuable person in the room, not the most annoying one. And in the end, this whole story leaves us with a really critical question, a question we have to ask ourselves in our own projects, in our own teams, in our own lives. When we hear a warning that makes us uncomfortable, we always focus on the cost of delaying, right? The cost of changing our plans. But this cautionary tale forces us to ask a much bigger, much more important question. What is the true cost of not listening?